Okay, welcome back to my primer on Stars Without Number. I can't promise this is the final part, but, it's like a Let's Play. Those go on for a while usually. So last time we talked about starships, very important. The different types of starships, the hull classes, the different fittings you can put on them, weapons, defenses, and how that all works with credit costs, power costs, mass costs. Very cool system. I like it a lot. It makes me want to build all sorts of ships. But this time, we're going to look at actually how to use those ships in the wide world of space. The galaxy. Because that's what they're for. Jumping to planet, going across the sector, evading pursuit and detection, and maybe getting into a little bit of ship combat, which is very different than normal combat. So let's get into it. So, traveling between traveling within a system is different than traveling from system to system. And system, in this case, of course, refers to a solar system. So within a solar system, say you want to go from Earth to Mars, the base travel time is 6 hours. Oh no, 48 hours. 48 hours to go from one region of a system, a solar system, to another region of the solar system. Now, that could be planet to planet, or that could be planet to an asteroid belt that's in the distance, or a planet to the sun in a solar system. A solar system is made up of a bunch of different points of interest, you might say. And later on, when you get to the sector creation section, you can see all the different points of interest that might be in a solar system, such as orbital ruins, asteroid bases, deep space stations, gas giant mines, refueling stations. So to move from a point of interest, such as a planet or something like that, to another one is 48 hours base time. Now, that number is then divided by the rating of your ship's spike drive. So if you have the base spike drive, which is level 1, it's divided by 1, which means it's 48 hours. If you have spike drive 2, it's divided by 2, 24 hours. So on and so forth, up to rating 6, which makes things very quick. Now, keep in mind, that's just the base travel time. The GM could alter that. If he thinks something is a lot closer than that, he could make it lower or farther, but that is the base. The base travel time to go within a region is 6 hours. So this is to go from like the surface of a planet to the moon of a planet. So to get from the surface of Earth to the moon would take 6 hours base. Again, this is divided by your spike drive, your engine, but base is 6. So that's from planet to moon, or from a orbiting space station to the planet, or even like a distress beacon that's near a planet or something like that. 6 hours is the base time. So depending on where you're going within a system, depending on your spike drive and things like that, it's going to be, roughly 6 hours to 48 hours. So that is within a system, within a solar system. But you might want to go to a different solar system. And that is where we utilize the spike drive. So, the spike drill. So the thing to keep in mind is there's a lot of abstractions here, okay? So when you make a sector, when the GM makes a sector as part of the beginning of the campaign and maps it all out. Hold on. Maybe I can actually make things easier. Hold on. I might be able to work with this. I want to bring up an image of a sector, because that'll probably make this discussion easier. So I'm going to try to bring up an image of a sector made through sectors without number, which is a really handy website to just get you started with a sector, and you can build off of it. Okay, here we go. Let me sort of change the size of this. There we go. Okay, good. All right, so you see, this is a standard sector. It is 10 by 8, and this would be your campaign setting. You can make multiple sectors if you're crazy and you need even more room for your players to mess around in, and you can connect sectors, but generally each sector is an isolated entity, and the reason that they cut off at certain points is because it's an abstraction. You have each hex represents a system. The ones that have a white dot in them represent solar systems. So the white dot is a sun, or it's a star. And then the black dot is a black hole. Everything else is empty space. Except there's sort of a lot of empty space, of course. And so this is an abstraction to make things just a little bit simpler. Even though, if you look at the one that's highlighted in red, you see that it's next to two black hole systems, and then there's another solar system to the upper right. That does not mean that they're nestled next to each other. They could be many light years apart. But the way that this is represented is really how the spike drill navigation systems see it. Because when you activate a spike drill and you jump from system to system, you are not traveling physically through space to get there. You are traveling through the meta dimension, the space beyond space, or whatever, between spaces. And so the reason that they're adjacent is because there's a much shorter path through the meta dimension that makes it quick and easy to get to an adjacent system. So even though they look adjacent, you can't just fly your ship from that system to the next system. You would never make it. It would take, decades or whatever to get there, because they are not just a skip and a hop away. So that's why the spike drill is necessary. So the rating of a spike drill then determines how many hexes you can move in one jump. So with a spike drill 1, the base spike drill, you can jump 1 hex away. So from the system that's highlighted here on the map, you could jump to any of those 6 systems around it. The black holes, the other solar system, the empty space. Right. So then the higher the spike drill rating, the further you can move in a single jump. So with a spike drill 4, you could jump 4 hexes away with 1 jump. And to do the jump, you have to go to the edge of the solar system. You have to go to the outer rim, furthest away from the star. But still, in somewhat reach of it. This is really, again, this is just like a role-playing game mechanic, really. But there's what's called a transition zone. And so there's this special transition zone where the gravity is still present, but it's not like non-existent. I guess. I mean, I guess you can jump anywhere. Because if you jump into empty space, you can jump out of it. So I'm not exactly sure how it works. Again, there's some things that are just not perfectly clear. But within a solar system, you have to go to the edge of space to jump out. That's just necessary. And so you can... It takes 48 hours base time to travel from anywhere in a system to go to the edge. That's the same time amount. And you can go to any edge of the solar system. So for this map you see, say you want to go to the solar system to the northeast, right? It's not actually to the northeast per se, but on a map, looking at this, it's a two-dimensional map, it's to the northeast. So you don't have to be at the northeastern edge of the current solar system to jump there. You don't have to line it up that way. If you're closest to the southern edge of this solar system, as long as you're in that transition zone, it doesn't matter. You can jump to any other hex within your range. So, yeah, you get to the edge of the solar system, you initiate your spike drill, and once you jump, it takes a base time of 6 days. Yeah, 6 days. And so that is also modified by both the spike drill rating as well as how many hexes you're moving. So 1 hex is 6 days with a spike drill 1. 2 hexes would be 12 days. So on and so forth. And if you're traveling 2 hexes with a drive 3 rating, it would take 4 days. So it's not entirely complicated math, but it's 6 days per hex divided by your spike drill rating. Now, you can try and trim this course. You can sort of cut corners while navigating through metadimensional space. And you can effectively increase your spike drill rating for the purposes of how fast you're going. But this adds a modifier to the roll that you're going to make. So, if you were using a spike drill 1, but you needed to get to an adjacent system in half the time, you could do so. You could push things and cut corners, but you have a greater chance of having a mishap. You cannot overclock things for the purpose of, distance. So, with a spike drill 1, you're not moving 2 hexes in 1 jump, no matter what. Although maybe a mod changed that, I don't know. Anyways, so the roll, that is important. The roll is done almost any time you make a spike drill jump. And this roll is done by the pilot. It's a intelligence pilot skill check. And by default, the process of actually jumping takes 30 minutes to fire up. To calculate everything and to get things going, it takes 30 minutes. And once the 30 minutes is up, you make the roll, and you see how well you do in your jump through metadimensional space. Of course, you can rush that, and you can jump it in a single round, but it makes things tougher. The base difficulty of this roll is 7. So most pilots are going to have a pretty good chance of doing a basic jump every time. But there's almost always a chance for problems, especially if you're not making a basic jump. So a big part of this is based on the rudder. And what the rudder is basically a map. It's basically a metadimensional map or route that has been planned out by other pilots. It's a course that you follow through the metadimensional space in order to get to your destination. So, if you do not have one of these, whether you were really dumb, or you just forgot, or you're going somewhere that nobody has really traveled ever or in a long, long time, and you are just doing this uncharted, the difficulty goes up by +6. So it goes from a 7 to a 13 difficulty, which is obscene. That's why most people do not do uncharted jumps. We'll get to what happens with a mishap later, but yeah, it's a lot more difficult to do this successfully. You have to be a pretty amazing pilot, and you have to be damn lucky. So that's +6 for completely uncharted. If the rudder is... If you do have a course, you have information about the course, about this route, but it's very old. It's more than 5 years old. Basically, like, metadimensional space has sort of shifted quite a bit, so it's not entirely reliable. The difficulty is +2, so from a 7 to a 9. Still doable, but not ideal. If your rudder is between 1 to 5 years old, so a little bit dated, hasn't been used in a little while, the difficulty is +1. If the rudder is less than a year old, it's just +0. That's a baseline. It's still difficulty 7. But ideally, you are doing a very well-charted course or a very recently charted course. The map, the rudder is very fresh and reliable. The difficulty is -2. So it becomes difficulty 5. And because of this, any skilled pilot using a very current rudder is almost certain to succeed. There's not going to be any problems. So you want to have a very up-to-date rudder because, let's be honest, you don't want a mishap. Not in metadimensional space. So those are the modifiers for the rudder, but there's the other things. Distance. Traveling further through metadimensional space makes things trickier, more likely to fail. So for every 2 hexes that you are traveling, it's +1 difficulty. So not a huge deal, and not a problem for Spike Drill 1 people. If you try to trim the course, so you try to have the time that it takes to jump, the difficulty is +2. So you don't want to do that too often, probably. And if you rush the activation of the jump, so instead of taking the 30 minutes, you jump immediately, it's also a +2. So if you're really in a hurry, and you rush the activation and you try and trim the course, you're looking at an 11 difficulty. If you have a really current rudder, maybe you can get that to 9, but still, rushing things and unreliable information are going to make these jumps a lot more dangerous than they could be. So, there you go. Sorry. So, mishaps. So, if you fail that pilot skill check, you roll 3d6 on this Spike Drill mishap table. And it ranges from, obviously, 18 is the best. Basically, by blind luck, you manage to make things perfectly okay. And you get where you wanted to go, and on the right time, everything worked out by blind luck. Obviously, that's not going to happen too often, but there you go. 16 to 17, it's successful. You get to where you want to go, but it's twice the base time. Which means probably you're going to be late for whatever you wanted to jump to, but that might not matter that much, but it could introduce some complications. But during that time, you're just floating through metadimensional space, so, it could be good. I mean, if you're being pursued or something, they don't know where you're going. I don't know. 13 to 16, you're off course, but you detect that you're off course, and so you get to make another pilot check, and you get to redo it and see if you mess up again. 9 to 12, you're off course, but you don't detect it, and so you spend the base time in transit, and then you get to make another pilot check. So you basically waste a whole bunch of time, and then you might fail again, so that's good. 5 to 8 is a power spike. One of your ship's systems is disabled until repaired, and you're stuck in transit for the full base time, so you're wasting a bunch of time, and you have a disabled system before you get to make another pilot check. But if the random system that gets disabled is your spike drill, then you treat it as if you rolled a 3, which we'll get to. 4 to 5, your ship emerges around the star nearest to the drill origin. So, you didn't go anywhere. And you roll, for each system of your ship, 50%, you roll a 50% chance. And if you fail, they get disabled. So you might have a whole bunch of disabled systems. And again, if your spike drill gets disabled, you treat it as if you rolled a 3. So rolling a 3 means you emerge around a star within 1d6 hexes of your target destination, which means you could be very far away from where you wanted to go, and it might take 4 or 5 jumps to get back to where you wanted to be. And normally, by default, you use up almost all of your fuel with one jump. So, basically, ship fuel only matters for jumps. Your ship almost always has enough fuel to move within a system, within a solar system. Like, you never need to track that unless your GM, has a special situation occur. So normally all you care about is your fuel for jumping, for spike drilling. So one jump, and you need to refuel. You can get fuel scoops, which means you can just fuel up around a star, so you don't have to dock somewhere or land somewhere. Or you can get fuel bunkers, which allow you to hold extra fuel, so you can jump a couple times or so without needing to refuel. But yeah, you use up a lot of fuel when you jump. So being 5 hexes away from where you wanted to go, you have to think about how many refuels you're going to take, how many more, do you have a rudder that's going to get you back to where you wanted to go, because it's a completely different course now. In that situation, it might be easier to just be like, well, I guess we'll just stick around here and see what's going on over in this hex. So 3s are pretty interesting, and obviously there's a bunch of chances to get a 3, so fun stuff. Okay, so that's jumping. You'll probably be doing that in most campaigns. All right, sensors and detection. So this one took me a while to sort of wrap my head around. It's not incredibly well written. I think it could be a lot simpler if I could make a complaint. But yeah, so sensors and detecting ships and locking onto ships is pretty important, because space is very big and very open and very three-dimensional. So, and you can't rely on your eyes almost at all, because without sensors, you know, another ship could be like 50 feet above you in space, and you would have practically no idea. So, yeah, sensors are very important. As a general matter, it is very difficult to spot a ship in deep space when it doesn't wish to be spotted. That's pretty much it. And there are ways to sort of make your ship more difficult to spot. If you remember some of the fittings and mods and stuff, emission dampeners and stuff like dampers. Was there any other stuff that was cool? Yeah, emission dampers. There was probably some other mods. Sensor mask can change things. There was some mods that made things a little bit trickier for other people. Low emissions. Any sensor checks to detect the ship have the difficulty increased by 2. Yeah. So there's things that can make you harder to detect if you really want to be stealthy. But keep in mind, you might not always want to appear stealthy, because that means you got something to hide. So it's not perfectly explained exactly how you know that something is out there. You know? The role here is to lock onto a ship, but it's not clear how you know that the ship is there in the first place. It says once a ship's energy signature is identified, however, it becomes much easier to follow the ship's movement. Such a positional fix is called a detection lock. Once a ship has been locked by an observer, it can be tracked at any distance in the system. Right, and then it goes into how to fix a lock. It says it requires the observer to be in the same region of space. So, I guess it's just accepted that your systems are just aware of everything within a region of space. Right? And that's how Elite Dangerous works. Which is, I guess, how I'm using it as a basis. In Elite Dangerous, when you're flying around, it shows you little bits of info about everything within a certain radius of your ship. So you see distress beacons pop up, you see planets pop up on your little data screen, you see other ships, and you see energy emission notifications and things like that. So all of these things pop up. But I think the difference here is in Elite Dangerous, of course, if you click on it, it just immediately shows you exactly where it is. And so you can fly to it, obviously. So basically, as soon as you see it, you already have a detection lock in Elite Dangerous. I think here the difference is sensors just say there's a free merchant in this region. That's all it says. It just, you have to lock in to really figure out in which direction and how far away and stuff like that. Because by default, without getting the lock, it can't tell you whether it's 100 feet from you or it's 300 miles from you. So you have to be in the same region, which, like I said, that's like a planet and sort of the orbit around a planet or around a moon. Different. There's obviously different regions of space, and there would probably be different regions of empty space. So if you and another ship are in the same region of empty space, you'd pop up on each other's sensors, I would assume. It wouldn't make much sense otherwise. So you're in the same region, and somebody is trying to lock onto you so that they can figure out exactly where you are. So this is a intelligence program skill check between the person doing the observer and the comms officer of the target. Um, it says ship, but then the modifiers also mention a station, which I guess is a kind of ship. So yeah, it's meant to be somebody trying to lock onto a ship of some type. So yeah, it's an opposed skill check, and the table here, other people have been confused about this as well. So you'll see at this table there are modifiers for the observer and modifiers for the target. So each person doing the rolling is going to get their own modifier based on this table. So the observer is the one that's sort of initiating this. They're the one that trying to lock onto something. And so they get a modifier based on the size of their setup. So a person in a fighter, in a small like X-wing, trying to lock on to, a free merchant, a frigate, they don't have as much communication equipment and as sophisticated communication equipment or whatever as a planet does, right? Because it's probably just like this one little system inside their little ship. So it is just not very sophisticated. There's not much there. So they get a +0 to their roll. And depending on how big the observer is, they get a bonus to their roll. So a frigate has a little bit more room for this communication equipment, so they get a +1. A capital ship obviously has a lot of this stuff, so they get +3. A planet has a whole communication building, probably, just to detect stuff for ships coming into the planet. So they get a +5 to their roll. They're very likely going to lock onto you, okay? But if the observer, the one trying to get a lock, has passive sensors, they get a -2, because by default, when somebody locks onto your ship, you are notified. You know that you have been locked in. Somebody has sensed you. They know all about you. So you're aware of that. With passive sensors, you do not get a notification. So someone could lock onto you and you won't even know. So this is pretty handy for like pirates that want to like ambush somebody. They don't give you a chance to run away. It's the element of surprise and all that stuff. There's other situations where you might want passive sensors, but if you use passive sensors, it's a -2 to try and get a lock on somebody. The target ship, so the one that's being locked on, they get a bonus based on how small they are, because they emit less of an energy signature. So a capital ship is massive. It's easier to detect, so it gets +0 to their roll. A fighter is very small, hard to detect, so they get a +3 to their roll. So a fighter trying to detect another fighter, the advantage is to the one that's being detected, because it's just hard. It's just harder. They just don't have the proper equipment to do so. And if you are... There's a special situation there where if you as a ship are trying to land on a planet, but you don't want to be detected, you want to come in silent and unknown, you can say that you're going to be avoiding any population centers, because that's where all the sensor equipment is. So if you're avoiding population centers, you get a +2 to your roll to avoid detection. But if you fail that, it kind of makes you look shady. So, that's the trade-off. So that's how it works. It's just a simple roll. It's a roll-off. But the modifiers are sort of reversed based on size and stuff like that. So that's a good table to have on your reference sheet. So if the observer wins the opposed roll, they get a detection lock. So they have locked into the ship. They know exactly where it is and how far away it is, and blah, 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 blah. If they fail, or they tie, ties go to the one that's being detected. So if they fail, it says they remain oblivious to the ship's presence, which sort of makes it sound like the ship does not show up on any sensors whatsoever. And this isn't even like some active thing that occurs. This is like the sensor equipment itself just doing an automatic scan. And so I guess that probably makes more sense than the Elite Dangerous thing. That was a good line for me to reread. So, back up. Let me wipe out Elite Dangerous for a second. So I guess the way they want it is it's just an automatic sweep of the region that happens constantly. But then if you fail and the system does not detect a ship, it does not detect it at all. It's like it doesn't exist for 24 hours. And then after 24 hours is up, if the ship is still there, it can try again. That's probably less realistic, I think. Because if the sensors are sensing automatically, constantly, I don't know what the 24-hour lockout is. But, okay, so, yeah, let's be clear. That's how it works, then. Because then, if you beat the system, and your ship is not locked in, it's as if you do not exist to the observer. They have to wait 24 hours, or they have to, like, physically see you in order to actually, realize that you're there. Which is definitely in the player's benefit, probably. Because most of the time, they're going to be the ones evading detection, I think. Okay, so if you get locked in, though, and you want to break the lock, you have to leave the region. So you have to physically fly away and just get out of the region. And as soon as the ship leaves the region, the observer and the target ship repeat the skill check. And if the observer wins again, the lock persists. It doesn't say how long. I guess. Yeah, it doesn't say how long. It just says if the observer wins, it continues to track the ship. So I don't know if it's like a permanent lock at that point or when they leave another region. I would probably say any sort of spike drill jump would break a lock. I would imagine. In Elite Dangerous, of course, when someone jumps, they leave behind like an energy signature, and you can figure out where they jumped to so that you can follow them. None of that's really mentioned here, I think. Oh, a ship that flees to the edge of the system region can drill out to safety from there. And unless they pick a chunk of the rim monitored by the locals, they can do so with impunity. Oh yeah, I guess I skipped a step. Of course. We've gotten like 2 pages in here. So anyways, I mentioned back to spike drills. When you jump out, you have to be at the rim of a system. You have to be on the outer edge. And you can be on any outer edge to jump to any system, whatever. When you jump into a system, however, you go to a fairly specific destination within a system. You basically enter into a ship's transition, into a system's transition zone. And if a ship is coming into a system from a spike drive course to the stellar northwest of the star, it will appear at the northwest edge of the solar system. Its pilot can't choose to overshoot that region, traveling across the solar system to come down on the southeastern edge of the star's transition zone. This property allows the solar system's owner to fortify probable transit paths into the system, placing defenses and picket ships. So, yeah, for most really modern civilized systems, they're going to have like an entrance zone. A few of them placed around a star where most traffic comes in. Because if there's a trade route between two systems, most ships that are trading are going to pretty much enter and leave a system at pretty much a known location. And so a system can prepare for that and do like custom checks or whatever right there when they arrive, so that they don't, they can do that right away. Or, if somebody's looking for trouble, they can have all their defenses right where someone's going to enter. So although you can leave a system at any spot on the edge, your arrival is probably going to be much more focused and predicted. Anyways, so basically, I'm not going to go over this too much. We've already talked about this for too long. Just read this section if you're running the game. But if you get locked on, you can do a pursuit to try and get away from people. This is going to be pilot skill checks, adding your spike drive rating to the roll. If a pursuer wins the tie or ties, you move into combat range. Otherwise, the pursued ship gets 6 hours of distance, modified by your spike drill, away from the pursuer. That's pretty much it. Then it talks about scanning planets and other ships to provide details about a planet or about a ship and obvious weaponry and stuff like that. So you're going to be doing that. Talks about maintenance for ships. So every 6 months, you have to spend 5% of your total non-crew cost to pay for basic maintenance. If you skip this, it's a -1 penalty to all ship skill checks and hit rolls. And at -4, if you skip this for 2 years, you gain a 10% chance per month of breaking down entirely. So, yeah, probably you don't want to skip maintenance too much if you can help it. But, sometimes you're poor. And sometimes, of course, you need to repair things and there's costs involved. Okay, ship combat. God, I thought I would get to this sooner. We've covered 3 pages so far of this book in this video. Okay, so space combat differs in a lot of ways. Primarily, number one, the ship combat round is 15 minutes long, compared to the normal combat round, which is 6 seconds. So quite a bit can happen in a ship combat round. Each ship that's involved in combat does 1d8 roll for initiative, and modified by the intelligence or dexterity modifier of the pilot. And so that is the ship initiative. Then, every ship needs to have a captain, of course, whether it is an X-Wing, whether it's a single fighter who has, their own captain, and that's it, or it's a capital ship that has a captain that runs everything. Everybody has a captain. The captain will decide the turn order every round. And it's not... There was a gameplay example at some point. I thought it was originally the captain at the start of the round says, okay, the gunnery's going to go first, then engineering, then comms, then bridge, then captain. Apparently it doesn't work like that. Apparently at the start of the round, captain will go... the captain will say, okay, engineering, you're going first. And then the engineering does their shit. And then the captain will be like, okay, gunnery, now you go. And so it's step by step. But the captain decides who goes in what order. And so there are different departments. There are 5 different departments. You have the captain, communications, engineering, gunnery, and the bridge. Player characters are pretty much always going to be the head of a department. They don't have to be, and you might have a situation where you have too many players, and so somebody's not the head of a department, and you might have a situation where you don't have enough players, in which case people have to double up, or triple up. Or in the case of a fighter, where you have one person, they are all 5 department heads. So they are the captain, the communication head, the engineering head, bridge head, gunnery head. They are everything. So it depends. But you are the head of a department. So on like a capital ship, You might be the head of, 100 people, telling them what to do. But the main thing to keep in mind here is just the roles are the head of a department, giving orders, and they might be also carrying out the orders themselves if there's no other people. So it's a flexible system that works for a fighter up to a capital ship. So most of the ship combat is based around command points. I know it's like a board game. It's crazy. So command points. Every round, the ship starts out with 0 command points. So you can't build them up and hold on to them. It starts at 0 every round. And it goes around for each player character. Every player character gets a turn. But they might not necessarily be the head of a department. Or they might be the head of multiple departments. But every player character, regardless, gets a turn. But sometimes you might have, like, an NPC as the head of a department. In which case, I think a player takes control of the NPC for the sake of being a department head. So that the GM is not deciding what people do. So, when it is somebody's turn and they are the head of a department, they have choices. They have these ship combat actions. So, there are 3 general actions available to everybody, whether you are the head of a department or not, and regardless of what department you're the head of, you can do the general actions. So if you have 6 player characters and somebody is not the head of anything, they can do general actions. They do get a turn. But if you are the head of a department, you also have access to the department actions. Some of these, in fact, pretty much every action aside from the captain actions and the general actions require command points in order to execute. And so basically a ship combat round consists of most of the team building up command points, and then a couple members of the team, or maybe one member of the team, using the command points in order to do like a special main action. So the big things that generate command points are the captain. The captain role is a big part of it, because they can do like into the fire to accept a crew lost crisis. So they can make things a little worse, but they get their lead skill +1 in command points. So if they're really good at leadership, they can use that skill to get a bunch of command points. And support department can pick another department, and they get to do 1 action for 2 fewer command points. So they can only do those things, their actions, once per round. But the general actions, you get to pick one of them, and that's it. So I think you can do captain actions, and then you can end with a general action, I believe. Unless an action says this is the only thing you can do, but I don't know if anything actually says that. Yeah. But the general actions, once you do it, your turn is done. So the general actions are how most people are going to be spending their turns, because this is how you generate command points for most people other than the captain. So do your duty. The ship gains 1 command point. And you have to basically declare something that you're doing that helps out the situation. Just something. I'm doing something related to something. And that gives the ship a command point. And that's your turn. So for some people, their turns are going to be very boring. And this was brought up in like the subreddit to the authors. Like, most people are just doing nothing every turn. And the way he explained it was very good and far better than I can do right now. But he basically said, like, it's really meant to be a cooperative, collaborative encounter where you're discussing every turn exactly what the team should be doing. this round. So, because otherwise, if it wasn't this way, the gunner would just be like, I'm firing my gun every round. Here's my gun. Here's some more guns. And the engineer is just like, oh, I'm engineering stuff every turn. Here we go, blah, blah, blah. And it wouldn't lead to any meaningful decisions, really. But when you have the whole team that has to decide, okay, we can only fire guns this turn, or we can only do really evasive stuff this turn, or so on and so forth. When you limit the number of possible actions per turn, you get everyone involved in the decision making. So yeah, most turns a bunch of people are just going to be doing practically nothing. I mean, they have to describe what they're doing that's helpful, but yeah, it's effectively not their special action. They don't get to shine every round. So do your duty is a good one. Above and beyond is the other one. That's a little bit riskier. You're actually doing a skill check, and if you succeed, you get your skill level in command points +1. So you have potentially to get more than do your duty. But if you fail, you take -1 command point, which could really screw over the team. So there's a bit of risk involved in that one. Finally, the last general action is dealing with a crisis. We'll get to that in a second. But crises are going to continually pop up, and they will need to be dealt with, or people will die. So, the special actions for different departments then are, for the bridge, it's mostly trying to, evade and boost the ship AC, or try and escape from combat and get away from a pursuer, or try and actually lock in and pursue somebody, and keep them in combat. Communications, they can do stuff like boosting the or causing the other target ship to have a command point penalty. Most NPC ships just have 4 or 5 command points to spend every turn. So putting a penalty on that equal to your program skill could really hamper them. So that's pretty nice. Or you can make your attacks more likely to hit for the gunner, or you can give an AC bonus for your ship. The engineering can increase your speed, which helps the bridge do stuff. Damage control, which helps you repair HP because you're gonna be hurting, and emergency repairs let you fix disabled systems because the gunner of any ship can potentially disable certain systems on a ship. It's very like FTL. It's pretty sweet. You can specifically, if you plan on boarding a ship, you don't want to potentially cause it to blow up or anything like that. So you might just disable the engines and disable the weapons so that it's just sort of dead in the water waiting to be boarded. Or you could disable maybe life support and cause them to just die and just leave it a ghost ship or something like that. You can do all sorts of targeting, which is pretty cool. So yeah, the gunnery, they can designate a special target, weapons, engines, or fittings the GM decides are vulnerable. It's harder to hit them, and you do half damage when you hit them, but if you do any damage at all to them through their armor, it's disabled. The system's disabled, or the engine's degraded. And if you hit them again, then you permanently destroy them. And you probably want to destroy them because they can be repaired with emergency repairs. So that's pretty cool. So then the gunnery can either fire a single weapon, or they can fire all their weapons, depending on CP and stuff like that, command points. But for every weapon on your ship, it has to be manned by somebody. So that's why a fighter can only have one weapon, really, I think. Maybe the fighter has a special case where they can have a couple different weapons if they can build it that way. But on most ships, any weapon has to be manned by an individual. So just because you're on a frigate, you're the gunnery head, you can't yourself fire all 3 of your guns or anything like that. The gunnery head can fire one gun in addition to being the head of the department, but if you have 2 guns and you want to fire all your guns, someone else has to be manning that gun. So there are going to certainly be cases where you want to have NPCs on your ship that can just handle the guns, or get the automatic targeting systems, or get some robots on your ship so you can fire all your guns, because that's cool. So yeah, on a turn, the bridge head, the comms head, engineering head, and the captain might all just be building up command points so the gunner can finally go last and shoot a bunch of guns a bunch of times. Or vice versa, they might switch it up and have the bridge try and escape combat, but they might also throw some command points over to the engineer to try and boost the engines first, stuff like that. It's a really interesting system. I can't wait to see it in action because it's very unique. It's really like board game-esque, but I think that really works in its favor. So if you are the head of multiple departments, so say you're undermanned or whatever, and you're the head of both engineering and gunnery, you can do actions from the engineering department, or you can do actions from the gunnery department. But you can't do both in one round. And so any departments that you're the head of that you don't pick, they automatically do your duty. So they just generate a command point. So when you're in a fighter, when you're in an X-Wing, you're going to pick one department to focus on each round, and then you just get 4 command points from the other 4. So every round you just have 4 command points, and then you pick one department that you're going to select. So, yeah, that's a pretty easy system. Okay, so when you take a hit, when your ship takes a hit, the captain, he can do into the fire, or no, he can do keep it together, to nullify a successful enemy hit and roll a crisis instead. Alternatively, once per round, the ship, the crew as a whole, can decide to nullify any hit and take a crisis instead. And so you have 2 potential chances per round of nullifying hits to take crises. One of them is specifically designated to the captain. The other one, if any one player decides to nullify a hit and take a crisis instead, it happens. So even if the rest of the party is like, no, fuck, take damage, we have too many crises, you take the damage, and you have one person named Phil, and he says, nah, screw that, let's take a crisis, you get the crisis. So yeah, it's just, that's nice. So you can beat them up and throw them out the airlock. So when you take a crisis, you roll a d10 and you get one of these 10 different types of crises. And some of them are just like one time, just you got to deal with it like immediately, otherwise it's really bad. Other things are just continually problematic. And there's things you can do to fix it, but it's not like a super immediate, you better handle this right now kind of thing. So all of these are pretty much dealt with deal with a crisis. Or most of these are dealt with deal with a crisis. So as a general action, somebody can say what they're doing that will solve a crisis, roll a relevant skill check, and if they pass, it's resolved. If they fail, it's certainly not resolved. Yeah, so there's stuff in here like engine lock, ship's engine has been jammed, or control circuits have gone non-responsive. Bridge can take no actions until it's fixed. Or no, bridge actions. Fuel bleed, if it's not fixed by the end of the next round, ship will jettison all fuel. But again, you can still fly within a system, because there's always enough fuel for that, don't worry. But you can't make any jumps until you refuel. So if you're hoping to jump out of there real quick, that's a problem. Your hull can be breached, different systems can be damaged. Crew could be really threatened, including PCs. So players' lives could be threatened by that if a crisis is not solved quickly. So yeah, those are going to crop up all the time, and those make things pretty interesting. A lot of them are somewhat generic, and so it's up to the GM to come up with sort of interesting situations depending on the ship. Because a crisis on a fighter is very different than a crisis on a capital ship. You know, they're just very different scales. So they're all pretty generic, and those are going to pop up from time to time. Okay, that's going to wrap it up for this video. We went from page we went from page 110 to page 118, pretty much. That's what we got through. Good God. So, I think there's going to be another video, I'm going to be honest, just because I really want to talk about sector creation, because this is some awesome, awesome shit. The different planets that can be created and the different worlds and sectors and systems, it's really interesting. So I definitely want to talk about this. Beyond that, the only other thing that's really cool is maybe like space magic and mechs. I mean, people like mechs. Mechs are cool. So, I don't know, maybe the next one will be the last one, but we'll see. Alright, anyways. My name is Mang. This has been my primer on Stars Without Number. And I'll see you fine folks in the next part.